Welcome to the Deep Sleep Channel. Tonight we're travelling back to ancient Rome, to a world of blood and sand, of crowds roaring for death, of warriors who fought for survival and glory. We're exploring the lives of the greatest gladiators who ever lived. We're hearing their stories. We're understanding where they came from, how they rose to fame, what made them legendary. These were not just fighters, they were athletes of extraordinary skill. They were celebrities, they were heroes to the common people. They were prisoners condemned to fight, slaves bought for combat, and volunteers who chose the arena. They came from different backgrounds, different circumstances, different lives, but they all became legends. This is a story about human achievement in the face of danger. It's a story about skill and training and determination. It's a story about the Roman arena, a place of death, but also a place where ordinary people could become famous, could become heroes, could transcend their circumstances. Close your eyes. Let yourself enter the Roman arena. Let yourself experience the roar of the crowd. Let yourself understand what it meant to be a gladiator. Let yourself hear the stories of the greatest warriors who ever fought. Let yourself drift into sleep contemplating courage, skill, fame, and the price of glory. We begin in ancient Rome, in a city of over 1 million people. Rome was the greatest power on earth. It controlled an empire that stretched from Britain to North Africa to the Middle East. Rome was wealthy, powerful, confident, and Rome loved the arena. The gladiatorial games were a form of entertainment that captivated the Roman people. Thousands would gather in the Colosseum or other amphitheaters to watch fighters battle each other. Some fought to the death, some fought until one fighter could no longer continue. The crowd would decide who lived and who died. The games served purposes beyond entertainment. They were political tools. Emperors and wealthy citizens would sponsor games to gain popularity. The games were a way for the common people to see their leaders, to feel the spectacle of power, to participate in something larger than themselves. The gladiators themselves came from various sources. Some were slaves bought and trained to fight. Some were prisoners of war forced into the arena as punishment. Some were condemned criminals. But some were free men who volunteered to fight, attracted by the possibility of fame, wealth, and status. We turn to one of the first great gladiators whose story we know in detail. His name was Flamma. Flamma lived in the 1st century AD during the reign of various emperors. He was born a free man, but at some point he volunteered to become a gladiator. Flamma's origin is unclear. He may have been born in Syria, he may have been born in another part of the Roman Empire. The sources are unclear. But what is clear is that he chose to become a gladiator, choosing a life of danger and potential death for the possibility of fame and fortune. Flamma fought for years in the arena. He fought hundreds of times. He became one of the most popular gladiators in Rome. The crowds loved him. They cheered for him. They were excited to see him fight. Flamma was known for his skill with the sword. He was strong, fast, and intelligent. He understood the strategy of fighting. He knew how to read his opponents. He knew how to respond to different fighting styles. Over his career, Flamma won 21 victories. In the arena of ancient Rome, winning 21 times was an extraordinary achievement. It meant he had survived 21 fights where his opponent died or surrendered. It meant he had killed or beaten 21 men. Flamma was offered the rudis multiple times. The rudis was a wooden sword given to gladiators who had fought long enough and won enough times to retire. It was an honor. It meant the gladiator could leave the arena and never fight again. But Flamma refused the rudis. Multiple times he was given the opportunity to retire, to leave the arena, to stop fighting, and multiple times he chose to continue fighting. Why would a man who had achieved so much, who was already famous and wealthy, choose to continue fighting? Why would he refuse the opportunity to retire? The answer may be that Flamma loved the arena. He loved the fight. He loved the roar of the crowd. He loved the intensity of combat. For him, the arena was not just a means to an end. It was his life. It was who he was. Flamma eventually died in the arena, probably around age 30. He died doing what he loved, fighting in front of thousands of cheering spectators. We move to another legendary gladiator named Spartacus. Spartacus is perhaps the most famous gladiator in history, though much of what we know about him comes from later sources and may be exaggerated or inaccurate. Spartacus was born in Thrace, in what is now Bulgaria. He was probably born a free man, possibly from a royal family. At some point he was enslaved or captured and sold into slavery. He was trained as a gladiator in the school of Gladiators, a wealthy businessman who owned and trained gladiators. Spartacus was an exceptional fighter. He was strong, athletic, and intelligent. He quickly became one of the most popular gladiators. The crowds loved him. He was successful in the arena. But Spartacus dreamed of freedom. He was enslaved, forced to fight for the entertainment of others, forced to risk his life for the profit of his owner. He resented this. He wanted to be free. 73 BC, Spartacus led a rebellion. He gathered other enslaved gladiators. He broke out of the gladiator school. He led them to a camp on Mount Vesuvius. From this camp, Spartacus began to gather a larger force. Enslaved people from across the region joined him. Within a short time, he had an army of thousands. Spartacus fought against the Roman army. He won battles. He defeated multiple Roman generals. He accumulated wealth and weapons. His army grew. For 2 years, Spartacus remained free. He led his army across Italy. He fought for freedom. He fought against Rome. But eventually, Rome sent a stronger force against him. A general named Crassus was given command of multiple legions. Crassus hunted Spartacus across Italy. The rebellion was slowly crushed. Then in 71 BC, Spartacus died in battle. His body was never found. According to legend, he died fighting, refusing to surrender, refusing to accept defeat. Thousands of Spartacus's followers were captured. They were crucified along the road from Rome to Capua as a warning to others who might rebel. It was a brutal end to a rebellion that had come close to succeeding. But Spartacus became a symbol. He became a symbol of resistance against oppression. He became a symbol of the desire for freedom. Even though the rebellion failed, Spartacus became immortal. His story was told and retold. He inspired people for centuries to come. We move to another legendary gladiator named Priscus. Priscus lived during the reign of Emperor Titus in the 1st century AD. He was one of the greatest swordsmen who ever lived. Priscus was famous for his incredible skill. He fought with precision and intelligence. He understood the mechanics of combat in ways that other fighters did not. He was quick, strong, and strategic. Priscus fought in the inaugural games of the Colosseum, which Emperor Titus sponsored. These were the first games held in the brand new Colosseum. Thousands of people came from across the empire to watch. It was a spectacular event. Priscus fought against another legendary gladiator named Verus. This was one of the most famous fights in the history of the arena. Both fighters were at the peak of their abilities. Both were beloved by the crowd. The fight was intense. Priscus and Verus fought for hours. They pushed each other to their limits. The crowd was on the edge of their seats. People were betting fortunes on the outcome. The energy in the Colosseum was electric. Finally, both fighters were exhausted. Both were bleeding. Both were on the verge of collapse. Neither could continue. They could barely stand. At this point, the crowd began to cheer. They were applauding both fighters. They were honoring the courage and skill they had displayed. They were acknowledging that both fighters deserved to live. Emperor Titus was in attendance. He saw the crowd's reaction. He saw that people wanted both fighters to survive, so he made a decision. He gave both fighters the thumbs up. Both would live. The fight would end in a draw. It was an extraordinary rare occurrence. Fights usually ended with one fighter dead or defeated, but this fight ended with both fighters alive, both being honored, both becoming legends. We move to another fighter named Carpophorus. Carpophorus was an exceptional fighter. He understood how to use his weapons. He understood how to move quickly and precisely. Part of it was training. Gladiators trained extensively. They trained with weapons. They trained their bodies. They trained their minds to be ready for combat. Part of it was luck. Fighting wild animals was extremely dangerous. Many fighters who had faced animals died. Carpophorus survived when others did not. Carpophorus became one of the most celebrated gladiators in Rome. The crowds loved him. He was famous for his incredible achievements against animals. He was elevated to celebrity status. What happened to Carpophorus in the end is unknown. The historical record does not tell us. But his legend persisted. He was remembered as one of the greatest gladiators who ever lived. We move to a fighter named Petraites. Petraites lived in an earlier period of Roman history. He was known for his skill and his courage. He was beloved by the crowds. Petraites fought extensively in the arena. He won many fights. He became famous and wealthy. He was a celebrity. But Petraites wanted to be remembered for something more than just his fighting ability. He wanted to be known as a hero, not just as an entertainer. So Petraites made a remarkable decision. When his time as a gladiator came to an end, he volunteered to be executed. He wanted to die in a way that would be remembered. He wanted his death to mean something. This is one of the most unusual stories in gladiatorial history. A man who had achieved fame and wealth, who could have retired and lived comfortably, instead chose to end his life in a way that would make him memorable. It speaks to something deep in the human psyche, the desire to be remembered, the desire for our lives to mean something, the desire to leave a legacy. We move to a fighter whose name has been lost to history, but whose story was recorded. This fighter was described as coming from humble origins. He was born into poverty. He was enslaved. As a slave, he was selected to be a gladiator. He was sent to a gladiator school to be trained. He was given weapons. He was given a chance at a different life. Through his skill and determination, this fighter became successful in the arena. He won fights. He gained fame. He gained wealth. But more importantly, he gained respect. The common people of Rome respected him. They admired his skill and his courage. They came to the arena to watch him fight. Eventually, this fighter was offered the rudis. He was offered the chance to retire. Unlike Flammer, he accepted. He left the arena. He lived a comfortable life. He became a wealthy man. What is remarkable about this story is that it shows how the arena could be a path upward for someone with no other opportunities. A poor, enslaved man could become wealthy and respected through his skill and determination. The arena was brutal, but it could also be transformative. We move to consider what made these gladiators great. What qualities did they possess? What separated them from other fighters? First, they had extraordinary physical ability. They were strong, fast, athletic. They had trained their bodies extensively. They had the physical capacity to fight for hours, to endure pain, to perform at high levels. Second, they had skill. They understood how to use weapons. They understood the mechanics of combat. They understood how to read their opponents and respond appropriately. This skill came from years of training. Third, they had courage. Fighting in the arena meant risking death. Every time they fought, there was a possibility they would not survive. They faced this possibility and fought anyway. This took extraordinary courage. Fourth, they had intelligence. The arena was not just about brute strength. It was about strategy. It was about understanding your opponent. It was about making the right decisions in moments of intense danger. Fifth, they had desire. They wanted to win. They wanted to survive. They wanted to become famous. This desire drove them to excel. It drove them to push beyond what seemed possible. Sixth, they had resilience. They fought repeatedly. They won and lost. They recovered from injuries. They got back in the arena and fought again. This ability to bounce back from adversity was essential. We contemplate the nature of the arena. The arena was a brutal place. People died. The crowds cheered for death. Violence was spectacle. But the arena was also a place where ordinary people could become extraordinary. A poor man could become famous. An enslaved man could become wealthy. Someone with no status could become a celebrity. The arena was a place where skill was valued. In Roman society, birth determined much. You were born into a social class, and that determined your position in society. But in the arena, skill mattered. Your ability to fight determined your success. The arena was a place where the common people had power. The crowd could decide who lived and who died. The crowd could make someone famous or forgotten. In a society where common people usually had no power, the arena gave them voice. We contemplate the question of why men chose to become gladiators. Why would someone volunteer for a life of danger and possible death? For some, it was desperation. They were enslaved or imprisoned. They had no choice. The arena was forced upon them. But for some, it was choice. They were free men who volunteered. Why would they do this? Part of it was the promise of wealth. Successful gladiators could become very wealthy. They could earn far more money than they could in any other profession available to them. Part of it was the promise of fame. In a world without television or movies, the arena was the place where people became celebrities. Gladiators were known throughout the empire. Their names were remembered. They were celebrated. Part of it was the love of combat. Some people are drawn to intense physical challenge. Some people love the feeling of danger. Some people are happiest when testing themselves against worthy opponents. Part of it was the desire to prove themselves, to show that they were the best, to demonstrate their superiority, to be recognized as a champion. We contemplate the training that gladiators underwent. Gladiators trained in schools called luduses. These were run by wealthy businessmen who owned the gladiators. In the ludus, gladiators trained with weapons. They trained with wooden swords first, then with real swords. They trained with shields. They trained with spears. They trained with every weapon they might encounter in the arena. They trained their bodies. They did exercises to build strength. They did exercises to build speed and agility. They did exercises to build endurance. They trained their minds. They learned strategy. They learned how to read opponents. They learned how to stay calm under pressure. They learned how to make quick decisions. The training was intense and often brutal. Trainers pushed fighters to their limits. Fighters were often beaten if they didn't perform well. Some fighters were killed during training, either by accident or by trainers who felt they weren't good enough. But the training produced extraordinary fighters, men who could fight with precision and intelligence, men who could perform at high levels under extreme pressure. We contemplate the political aspects of the arena. The arena was not just entertainment, it was also a political tool. Emperors and wealthy citizens sponsored games. By sponsoring games, they gained popularity. The common people were grateful. The crowds remembered who gave them entertainment. Emperors used the arena to demonstrate their power. By bringing exotic animals from across the empire, they showed their control. By sponsoring massive games, they showed their wealth and authority. The arena was also a place where political messages were sent. Sometimes condemned prisoners fought in the arena. Their deaths were executions, but they were performed as entertainment. The message was clear. This is what happens to people who oppose Rome. Sometimes slaves or prisoners were forced to enact famous scenes or stories. They were forced to die in ways that echoed mythology or history. The crowd watched as entertainment while real people died. We contemplate the question of the ethics of the arena. The arena was a place of violence and death. People died for entertainment. Slaves were forced to fight. Wild animals were killed. By modern standards, the arena would be considered barbaric and immoral. We would not tolerate such spectacles today, but we must understand the arena in its historical context. The Roman people valued different things than we do. They found entertainment in forms that seemed brutal to us. They accepted violence as part of normal life in ways that we do not. This does not mean we should condone the arena, but we can understand it as a product of its time. We can recognize that the people who participated in or enjoyed the arena were not evil. They were simply people living in a different culture with different values. We contemplate the lives of gladiators after they left the arena. Some gladiators retired wealthy. They bought property. They started businesses. They lived comfortable lives. Some became trainers. They used their experience and knowledge to train new generations of gladiators. Some became celebrities and performers. They traveled and gave demonstrations of their fighting ability. Some never left the arena. They fought until they died. Like Flamma, some fighters refused the opportunity to retire. They lived and died in the arena. We contemplate what made these gladiators legendary. It was not just their skill or their victories. It was the stories about them. It was how people remembered them. Flamma was remembered because he refused to retire. He was remembered as a man who loved the arena so much that he chose to die fighting rather than live in retirement. Spartacus was remembered because he rebelled. He was remembered as a man who fought for freedom against overwhelming odds. Even though he failed, he became a symbol of resistance. Priscus and Verus were remembered because of their famous draw. They were remembered as two warriors so evenly matched that they both earned the respect of the crowd and the mercy of the emperor. The gladiators were legendary because their stories spoke to something deep in human nature. They spoke to courage and determination. They spoke to the desire to excel. They spoke to the desire to be remembered. We contemplate our fascination with gladiators. Even though the arena ended nearly 2,000 years ago, we remain fascinated by gladiators. We watch movies about them. We read books about them. We visit the ruins of the Colosseum. Why are we so fascinated? Part of it is the drama and excitement. The arena was a place of high stakes. People fought for their lives. The outcome was uncertain. This drama appeals to us even today. Part of it is the heroism. Gladiators demonstrated extraordinary courage and skill. They faced danger and performed anyway. This heroism speaks to something in us. Part of it is the mystery. We know little about the actual lives of gladiators. Much of what we know comes from later sources. There are many unanswered questions. The mystery is intriguing. Part of it is the contrast with our modern world. We have largely eliminated such brutal entertainment from our culture. The arena seems exotic and strange to us. It represents a different way of being human. As we drift into sleep contemplating the gladiators, we contemplate several profound truths. First, that humans are capable of extraordinary achievements when motivated by desire and trained through discipline. The gladiators achieved things that seem impossible. They did this through training and determination. Second, that humans will accept danger and risk their lives for the possibility of glory and fame. We are not purely rational creatures focused on survival. We are willing to take risks to achieve something greater than mere survival. Third, that society can change. The arena that was central to Roman culture has been eliminated. Human civilization has moved away from such brutal entertainment. This shows that social change is possible. Fourth, that stories and legends matter. The gladiators are remembered not just for what they did, but for the stories that were told about them. We remember Spartacus not just as a rebel, but as a symbol. We remember Flamma not just as a fighter, but as a man who loved the arena. The stories shape how we understand history. Fifth, that even in brutal systems, humans find ways to achieve and excel. The arena was brutal. It was a system designed to exploit and destroy people. But within that system, some people achieved extraordinary things. They became famous, they became wealthy, they became heroes. Sleep knowing that the gladiators lived extraordinary lives. Sleep knowing that they faced dangers that we can barely imagine. Sleep knowing that they pursued excellence and achievement in a way that resonates even today. Sleep knowing that courage and skill matter. Sleep knowing that humans can accomplish extraordinary things. Sleep knowing that the desire for fame and glory is deep in human nature. Sleep knowing that systems can change. Sleep knowing that the arena that seemed so central to Roman civilization is now gone. Sleep knowing that human society continues to evolve. Sleep peacefully, contemplating the legends of the arena. Good night from the Deep Sleep Channel. Sleep well and dream of warriors who fought for glory in ancient Rome.